The Stranger at the Lake, A Haunting Tale. I've spent almost every summer of my life at Crystal Lake. My parents started renting the same cabin when I was a kid, and over the years it became tradition. Lazy days swimming, late night bonfires, and the kind of silence you only get when you're miles away from civilization. This summer was different. I was 18, and for the first time I was allowed to take the canoe out alone. My parents were inside, probably drinking wine and playing cards, while I paddled across the glassy water, heading toward the farthest shore, a part of the lake I'd never explored. That's when I saw him, a man standing just inside the tree line, tall, motionless. His clothes were dark and heavy, like he hadn't dressed for summer at all. His hoodie looked damp, clinging to his frame, and even from the water, I could tell something was off. He didn't move. He just watched me. I hesitated, then lifted a hand in a half-hearted wave. No response, just silence. Then without a word, he turned and melted into the trees. I don't know why it unsettled me so much. Maybe it was the way he stood, unnaturally still, like he was waiting for something. Or maybe it was the fact that there shouldn't have been anyone out there. The other cabins were miles away, and as far as I knew, this side of the lake was nothing but dense forest. I told myself it was nothing, just some hiker, maybe a camper. But the next morning something happened that I couldn't explain. I woke up early, planning to take the canoe out again, but when I got to the dock, it was gone. Panic shot through me. The lake was huge, but there was no wind last night. No reason it should have drifted off. I ran along the shoreline, scanning the water, and then I saw it. Half submerged, maybe 50 feet from shore. I waded out and pulled it back, but as soon as I got a closer look, my stomach dropped. The sides were scratched up, deep, jagged gouges, like something had clawed at the wood. The paddle was missing, and there, at the bottom of the canoe, were holes like someone had taken an axe to it. I ran back to the cabin, breathless, but I didn't tell my parents. What was I supposed to say? Some guy in the woods stole our canoe, then dragged it back and wrecked it. It sounded crazy. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing those gouges and holes, the scratches, the way that man had stood, unmoving, just watching. Then just past midnight, I heard it, a soft splash, then another. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The cabin was dark, but the window next to my bed looked straight out onto the lake. I moved slowly, peeling back the curtain just an inch. There was someone in the water, a dark shape, half submerged, moving through the lake toward our dock. My breath caught in my throat. I could just make out the silhouette, broad shoulders, slow, deliberate movements. He wasn't swimming. He was walking. The water was deep out there, too deep to stand, too deep to walk, and yet he was coming closer. And I heard it. Wet footsteps on the dock. Soft. Careful. Like he didn't want to wake anyone up. I wanted to scream to wake my parents, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, frozen, watching as a shadow stretched across the deck. Then the doorknob rattled, a slow testing twist. I sucked in a breath. My body locked up, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then silence. Seconds passed. A minute, nothing. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I forced myself to move. I ran toward my parents' room, shaking them awake, whispering frantically about someone outside. My dad grabbed his flashlight and a baseball bat and stormed onto the deck. But there was no one there. No wet footprints. No ripples in the water. Nothing. just the endless quiet lake stretching out into the dark. We left the next morning, cut the trip short. My parents acted like I imagined it, but I know what I saw. And the worst part, when we got home, I checked online, looked up old news reports. 10 years ago, a man drowned in Crystal Lake, a fisherman. His body was never found. And the search team, they were told he was last seen near the farthest shore. The same spot where I first saw that man standing. And the clothes he was wearing, a hoodie, waterlogged, just like the one I saw that night. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for spine-chilling horror content and to watch more scary videos. Please share with family and friends. The abandoned campsite, a terrifying night in the woods. I've done a lot of camping over the years, never thought much of the dangers until that night. It was supposed to be a routine trip. Me, Josh, Ethan, Kim, and Lacey, best friends since high school, hiking through the mountains, spending a night under the stars. We followed a marked trail until we stumbled on an old campsite. At first glance, it just didn't look right. The fire pit was rusted over, surrounded by burnt-out logs that hadn't been touched in years. A collapsed tent lay on its side, fabric torn and stiff with age. And next to it, a single sleeping bag, unzipped, damp, and covered in mold. Someone left in a hurry, Lacey muttered, stepping over a crushed lantern. I didn't like it, but we'd been hiking all day. We were exhausted. Against my better judgment, we decided to camp a few feet away. As we set up our tent, Ethan noticed something on a tree near the abandoned site. Hundreds of tally marks, carved deep into the bark. Why would someone do this? He asked. I shrugged. Probably some bored camper. At least that's what I told myself. That night the forest was silent. Too silent. No crickets. No rustling leaves. Just nothing. At some point I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, Josh was shaking me awake. His face was pale, eyes wide with something I'd never seen before. There's someone outside. I held my breath, listening intently. A twig snapped, echoing through the stillness. Then, soft, deliberate rustling followed, sending chills down my spine. Lacey beside me reached for the tent's mesh window and peeked through cautiously. Then she froze, her eyes wide with fear. There's a guy just standing there, she whispered, her voice trembling. We all crowded around the mesh, peering into the dark, our hearts pounding, and she was right. About 20 feet away, a shadowy figure stood behind a tree, barely visible in the moonlight. They weren't moving, just watching. No way, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Then we heard it, a sound that sent chills down our spines. A slow, deliberate scratching sound, echoing through the stillness of the night. We turned toward the tree beside our tent, hearts pounding. The one covered in tally marks. The sound continued, scrape, scrape, like nails on a chalkboard. Someone was adding more marks, slowly and methodically. Josh grabbed the knife from his pack, yanked the zipper down, and lunged outside, ready to confront whatever it was. But the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness. We shined our flashlights around, desperately searching for any sign of movement. But the woods were empty, eerily silent. No footprints, no movement, nothing but the oppressive silence. None of us slept. After that, too afraid to close our eyes. At sunrise, we packed up and hiked back as fast as we could, eager to leave the haunting forest behind. When we reached the ranger station, the air felt heavy with an unspoken tension. We asked about the site, hoping for some reassurance. The ranger's expression changed immediately, his eyes narrowing. You camped there? He asked, his voice low and filled with concern. We nodded. He sighed deeply, as if burdened by a heavy secret. A guy went missing out there 2 years ago, he finally said. They found his campsite just like you described, untouched and eerie. Tent collapsed, gear left behind. Like he vanished into thin air. but there were fresh tally marks on a tree. I frowned, puzzled by this detail. So when did those show up? The ranger hesitated, clearly troubled. They started appearing after he and others disappeared. We never camped again, haunted by the mystery. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for spine-chilling horror content and to watch more scary videos. Please share with family and friends. The Airbnb horror story you won't believe. You know that feeling when something is too good to be true? It's like a nagging voice in the back of your mind, whispering doubts and uncertainties. That's exactly how I felt about the Airbnb we booked for our summer trip. The pictures were breathtaking, almost surreal, like a dream vacation spot. It was stunning, right by the beach, modern, spacious, and ridiculously cheap. Too cheap. The kind of deal that makes you wonder if there's a catch. The listing had glowing reviews, but something about it felt off. The reviews were almost too perfect, like they were written by the same person. Still, my friends and I were too excited to care. We were caught up in the thrill of the adventure, the promise of an unforgettable summer. We ignored the red flags, convinced that we had found a hidden gem. The first night, we explored every inch of the house. Every door opened, except one. Probably a supply closet. Jake shrugged. I tried the handle, locked. No big deal, right? But something about that door bothered me. The next morning, while everyone went out for breakfast, I stayed behind, enjoying the quiet. The house felt different when it was empty, almost like it had a life of its own. I wandered through the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway, savoring the rare solitude. Then I heard it. A soft, shuffling noise. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My ears strained to catch more, my mind racing with possibilities, like someone moving inside that locked room. I froze, heart pounding. The locked room had always been a mystery, a place we never ventured into. Now it seemed to be the source of the unsettling sound. Pressed my ear against the door. Silence. I held my breath, waiting for any sign of movement, any clue that might explain the noise. The silence was deafening, amplifying my anxiety. I laughed it off, probably my imagination, maybe pipes settling or something. I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation, that my mind was just playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house seemed to breathe around me, its walls whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Every creak and groan felt as if there were a hidden presence watching and waiting. I barely slept. The night seemed endless. Every creak and whisper of the house amplified in the silence. My mind raced with thoughts, unable to find peace. I tossed and turned, but sleep eluded me. In the morning, the chair in my room was moved. It was subtle but noticeable. The chair, which had been neatly tucked under the table the night before, was now slightly askew. It was as if someone had been there, sitting, watching me sleep. The locked door was now open. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. The door had been closed and locked when we went to bed. Now it stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. It felt like an invitation, or perhaps a warning. My friends were still asleep. Slowly, I stepped inside. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft breathing of my friends. I tiptoed, careful not to wake them, my eyes scanning the room for any signs of disturbance. The room was small, plain, just a single slept-in bed, a wooden chair. It was as if the room had been frozen in time, untouched by the chaos of the night. The simplicity of the room was almost comforting, a stark contrast to the unease that had settled in my stomach. And a dirty, empty plate. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. Someone had been here, eating, living, and watching our every move. But who, and why had they left in such a hurry? If they had left. My breath caught in my throat. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. We were never alone. Someone had been in this house, possibly still were. The thought was terrifying. Someone had been in there recently. The traces were subtle but undeniable. It was clear that we had been intruded. I showed everyone what I had found. We packed our bags and left within the hour, dumping the key in the lockbox without saying a word. The silence between us was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We didn't need to speak. The urgency of our departure said it all. We needed to get out, and fast. 2 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. "You weren't supposed to enter that room." My stomach dropped. I blocked the number immediately, trying to convince myself it was a prank. A week later, a news article popped up about the property. My hands shook as I read the headline, "Missing Tourist Last Seen at Local Airbnb." The last text they sent before vanishing read, "There's someone else living in this house. Help." Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for spine-chilling horror content and to watch more scary videos. Please share with family and friends.